Welcome to my presentation, Fat Not a Fetish, Balancing Beauty Standards and Fat Sexuality. First, I have some vocab I want everyone to keep in mind as they watch. These words will be coming up. Some we will explore later, like fat phobia and fetish. So, fat phobia, what is it? According to Cambridge Dictionary, it is an unreasonable dislike or unfair treatment of people because they are fat. A research article cited says the term fat phobia refers to a pathological fear of fatness, often manifested as negative attitude and stereotypes about fat people. My interpretation of fat phobia would be the societal phenomenon that has been built over centuries to dehumanize larger bodies and therefore instill fear in the masses, making it easier to keep control of them. And what is a fetish? So, according to dictionary.com, fetish is a habitual erotic response to or fixation on an object, part of the body, or activity ordinarily regarded as non-sexual. Next, I'm going to talk about beauty standards and how they're used to control how we experience fat bodies. First vocab word, othering of fat bodies. So we've got a quote from this article. In respect to the fat body and the thin body, there always must be that which is wrong in order for it to be clear what is right. One must accompany an other. I'd like to say, while highlighting the differences in each individual can make us feel special and unique, when it comes to our fat bodies, society has determined that they are different, they are wrong, or shameful. Another aspect of othering would be objectification. So I've got some quotes from our textbook, and I'd like to highlight the quote in the middle. Objects do not have the same moral status as people. If you own an object, you can destroy it if you want. Others may say it's foolish to do so, but you are within your right to destroy it nonetheless. Now I'd like to highlight how this othering we call fat phobia is, like most things in our society, rooted in racism. Here we have a picture of Sarah Bartman from the BBC, and she's from the early 19th century. She was taken from her homeland in what is now South Africa, taken to be put on display in Britain. Her draw for the attention of the people in Britain, according to our textbook, emphasizing her large breasts and protruding buttocks. She was put out there to be gawked at because of her large black body. Changing gears, I feel like we can't talk about beauty standards without talking about pop culture. And in pop culture, there are exactly two types of sexual women when it comes to fat women. We have the sad, lonely fat girl, who is considered an asexual entity, and we have the fat slut, who is down for anything, anytime, anywhere with anyone. So, some info on the asexual fat girl. We have an article that says the representation of asexuality of fat people comes from a culture that finds our bodies reprehensible. The sad, unloved, sexless fat girl is a staple of our cultural framework. She hides in the shadows, watching her thin, pretty friends have all the fun and get all of the boys. She stays home on Friday night, watching movies and eating cakes and chocolates to solve her loneliness. The flip side of that would be the fat slut. The article goes on to say, after years of internalizing the desperate, lonely, asexual fat girl narrative, some of us find solace in its opposite. The hypersexual fat girl is ready for heterosexual sex at all times. And how do we know that this fat person is a slut? Well, because of her body. We can see fat female bodies are hypersexualized because these women's bodies must have large breasts, hips, and butts which satisfy the male gaze. Now, of course, we know all bodies look different, and just because you're fat doesn't mean you'll necessarily have large breasts or a large butt, but it does satisfy the male gaze, that objectifier that dictates how we view women. The article goes on to say, these women, the fat women in this scenario, utterly reduced to objects, anything but actual human beings with thoughts and feelings and an inner life, are framed as desperate, sad, lonely, but ultimately down for anything. She couldn't get it anywhere anyway. The fat slut should be grateful for the attention. And it's not all objectification. People who love people with fat bodies, no matter what their size, also are subject to the controlling images and narratives in our fatphobic society. I've got some quotes on this screen from different research articles if you want to go ahead and pause me and read them, but if not, I'm going to take a moment to be rather vulnerable. This shame in fat love is possibly a new concept for some of you, especially if you have never lived in a fat body. But I've noticed an interesting pattern in my life when discussing this fat, not a fetish concept with my friends and colleagues, especially if they are straight-sized or not plus size. They never seem to fully grasp what I'm saying with the fat, not a fetish vibe. Of course, they agree with me and validate me and want to show me that they support me, but they don't generally get it. They don't fully understand. The first time I discussed my fat, not a fetish concept with a fellow fat girly, she, without missing a beat, looked at me and said yes. Because the other girls aren't the ones getting the call at 2 a.m. when guys are horny and don't want their friends to know that they like to bleep fat chicks. Now, this being a women and gender studies class, of course, we have to talk about fat bodies and how the different genders may experience life in a fat body. So first, briefly, I want to talk about existing as a fat woman. I've got some different quotes on the screen here, but importantly, I wanted to point out that there was this research article I found in the NSU library going back to the 90s about fat phobia and how this control group perceived fat bodies. And they also cited 2 investigations, so 3 total studies. And all 3 studies found that women, in general, are more fat phobic than men. I wonder if the male gaze has anything to do with that. Funnily enough, the article from earlier also goes on to say a woman may see herself as fat and undesirable because this is the way she is objectified by the culture at large. It's our recurring nightmare, the male gaze. First, I wanted to highlight this quote from our textbook that I absolutely loved and had to include. And it goes, men are judged primarily on what they can accomplish, whereas women are judged primarily on how they look. Men also play the part of voyeur, someone who takes sexual pleasure in looking. Women in art and society more generally are surveyed. Women are evaluated primarily on how they look rather than what they can do. And then I wanted to highlight a quote from earlier. Fat female bodies are hypersexualized because these women's bodies must have large breasts, hips, and butts, which satisfy the male gaze. So for my last little bit on gender, I wanted to talk about how men specifically view and treat fat women specifically. And probably to nobody's surprise, it all comes back to shame and objectification. Now, I probably should have given this warning at the beginning of the presentation in case anybody is watching this without headphones and with children near, but if you are, stop. And this next section, we're going to get wild. We're going to talk about how fat bodies specifically are fetishized. Is it a niche? Is it a fetish? Or is it normal human attraction? Can't talk about fetishes without talking about kink and power dynamics. So in kink, we have BDSM, of course. You may or may not be familiar with the acronym. BDSM is a physical, psychological, and sexual role play involving power exchange between consensual participants. Broken down, that looks like bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, sadism and masochism. And I would like to note that I quoted a research article that didn't highlight that kink does not have to be sexual. So in the world of BDSM, we have role-playing, which of course is going to have different power dynamics. What those power dynamics might look like with a fat admirer, somebody with a fat fetish, would be control over another person's body/lived experience and submitting to their power. It could also be the subconscious power and control over parts of yourself you don't like and want to punish in others. Now we're going to get more into the specific fat world. And first we have fat body specific fetishes. We've got BBWs, big beautiful women, SSBDBWs, supersized big beautiful women, BBBW, big beautiful black woman, and BHM, big handsome man. You can pause to read this, just some interesting notes I noticed while searching for references for this presentation. Now moving on to different kinks we have for fat admirers. We've got feeders, which is kind of self-explanatory, somebody who likes to feed or watch a fat person eat food. Next would be hogging. These are kind of the gentlemen I was talking about earlier with the shame in fat love. We can see this article says, a practice whereby men seek out women that they deem unattractive or fat for sexual purposes. And lastly, we have squashing, where a female model sits on a male partner. Now, it's not all bad. It's entirely possible for these BBWs to reclaim their power and find pleasure in this being fetishized. So I know we've talked about objectification and the male gaze and how toxic that can be, but in BDSM, there actually are people who have an objectification kink, where they enjoy being objectified. And that could look like an exhibitionist kink. And we've got this quote from that research article, just as there is pleasure in looking, so too can pleasure be derived from being looked at. And through this objectification and reclaiming, these BBW performers had improved self-esteem. A research article on BBW cam performers said being fetishized and having their bodies worshipped can be a positive experience that prompt BBW performers to love their bodies in the same way their fetishizers do. Now, if we were in person and I were presenting this live, I would ask for audience participation in identifying straight size equivalent fetishes or kinks. Obviously, we can't do that in a pre-recorded presentation, but I will just let you think on that for a moment. And in conclusion, I would like to talk about my goal of moving toward equality, bodily equality. Realizing that there is nothing inherently wrong or bad about having a fat body. It is not an oddity. It is not abnormal. It is not shameful or wrong. Evidently, the adult entertainment industry hasn't got the memo, however. One article revealed that the Adult Video News Awards in 2017 removed the BBW Performer of the Year and lumped it in with Niche Performer of the Year, a category which honors men and women who appear primarily in fetish-themed productions, including those in BBW, BDSM, mature, and other specialized genres. And a fantastic driving force towards the equality of bodies is the health at every size movement. I have subscribed to this model for a few years now. I absolutely love it, and it makes perfect sense to me. You truly cannot tell how somebody is feeling or how healthy they are based on the size of their body. Nutrition and joyful movement should be the priority, not losing weight and buying into a billion-dollar industry. There's another tactic for control. Truly, I don't believe the equal treatment of bodies is asking too much, because we can normalize fat bodies, because fat bodies are normal. There's nothing obscene or wrong or horrible or weird or niche about them. Thank you for watching. I'm sorry I trauma dumped and went way over the time.